Welcome to chapter 3. We are going to be learning all about cells and energy. So, in looking at cells, in chapter 1, we talked about the fact that all life is composed of cells at the fundamental unit. So, the cell is the smallest unit of life that can function independently. Remember that we have smaller things like organelles and molecules and atoms, but they can't function independently. They require in terms of supporting life. So units of life, they can function independently as chemicals, but they can't function independently as a part of life. Life begins at the unit of the cell because that's where you can have a single-celled organism, or cells can work together, but they perform their own functions. So again, one of the very basic characteristics of life. One of the things we know about cells is that they're very small, and we'll shortly be looking at microscopes. But cells were not even able to be discovered until microscopes were invented because most cells are too small to be seen by the naked eye. So let's look at how the discovery of cells unfolded. So in 1660, Robert Hooke created a microscope. So basically, he just messed around with some lenses and he got them organized in such a way that he could actually see the cells of cork, which you think about like cork that goes in a wine bottle. That's exactly the same material. It's a part of a certain type of tree, and the cells are somewhat large, so he was able to actually view those. Leeuwenhoek in 1673, he improved on that design and he was able to see even smaller things, such as large bacteria, some protists, which are single-celled organisms, blood cells, which tend to be a little bit larger, especially white blood cells, and sperm. And then we don't really have a whole lot of discoveries until the 1830s. Robert Brown discovered the nucleus, and shortly after that, other scientists went on to discover the cytoplasm. So now we're starting to see that there are things inside a cell. It's not just a little bubbly looking thing anymore. It's now something that has some smaller components. Building on that theory, 9 years later, Schleiden and Schwann formulated cell theory. The early parts of cell theory, we're going to see that this theory is expanded later on. But basically, it says that all organisms are composed of cells, cells the basic unit of life, and also later on with Virchow's 1855 contribution that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So those are the three components of early cell theory. In 1859, Louis Pasteur disproved the theory of spontaneous generation. It used to be thought that life just sort of spontaneously originated, and the arguments about this would be like mold forming on broth, or one of the other famous ones was picking up like feed bags and finding mice running out from under them, and people thought that the mice just kind of were spontaneously generated underneath that area. So Louis Pasteur, by pasteurizing or purifying broth, was able to show that bacteria did not spontaneously generate, because in an isolated system they actually did not grow. And then later on, so now we're to the 1950s, this is when magnification gets to the point that we can start to see some very tiny things. So we have light microscopes, scanning electron microscopes, transmission electron microscopes. And basically what was discovered was that all cells share the same basic chemical composition. They use energy, and their genetic information is passed on when the cell divides. So here we have our cell theory in its entirety. So we see the components of the early cell theory that we mentioned, and the components that were later discovered. So modern cell theory consists of these 6 tenets.